All right, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to the ShOUT Show, episode 28. Can you believe that? We're almost to the end of Ramadan. Who thought I could do it? I mean, I said I want to do a 30 for 30 challenge. And by the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I am doing it, but I am doing it with the help of people like yourself tuning into the show, giving me suggestions, giving me shout outs. And you know me, I shout you right back out. So listen, I really wanted to do something special today. Someone came to me. We had a conversation about COVID-19 and da 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 da. And I was like, of course we're talking about the jobs. Of course we're talking about health, things like that. And I said, you know what we're really not talking about? We're not talking about language. We're talking about language in terms of communication, how we're speaking to one another. Because anytime you come to a crisis, particular type of language you have come into the crisis, and there's a particular type of language you have coming out of the crisis. Like if you think about it, some of the words that we're using now as generic terms, vaccinations, um, pandemic, we branded the word coronavirus, COVID-19. It's really interesting how the mind works because it's not an accident. It's not an accident. If you think about it and you do some research, the coronaviruses have been around forever, but it takes a certain situation to push them into the main view or the main purview, if you will. And I think the interesting thing is how we respond to it. And I wanted to take this time because I think it's important for people who are not in the media, for people who are not in film production and things like that, to understand what's going on, because this is a very pivotal period. This is a pivotal period because everything is flattened, meaning that the technology that normally would be withheld for you because of financial restraint or, let's just say, educational issues, learning a certain technology are out of the way. Like for myself, I'm using a broadcast platform called StreamYard. And what I like about StreamYard, it allows me to use all the things that I learned from way back in 1988 and put them into this platform from when I was a journalism student. Like this is journalism for me. So people go, hey, preach, I don't know, why do you do? I'm following a journalism code. I'm following a TV model, if you will. And I thought it was really interesting if I could share a lot of what's going on right now in terms of communication, because it affects you just like it affects me, just like we're using it to frame this whole thing of COVID-19. I think it's really, really important, brothers and sisters, to understand what communication is coming towards you. Like I can literally tell you that you're not getting all the information that you need to get. And the reason I can say that is just the way it's being formed. You're receiving a lot of information. It's like a network type of information, meaning that one person says it and the other people around it continue to say it. That's more like an amplification of a message. Doesn't necessarily have to be the right message. I think everybody should know here that we are in an age, even with COVID, and COVID might bring it back, but in terms of journalism, there's very little investigative reporting. There's spying, there's detective work, but there's very little investigative reporting. When I learned journalism, when I got my journalism degree, I'm going to take you guys back to 1984. What I learned about journalism, which does not happen now, is it had to have sources and you had to have integrity, and those things had to be on par with one another. So when you said something or you quoted somebody, you had to be able to show that person and you had to clear that person. The whole idea of on the record, off the record, that goes back to that time. These days, nobody really does on the record, off the record, off the record. We do anonymous sources. Don't quote me. If you look at the presidential press conferences, they're farce. You're not really answering questions. You're not listening to the people who are asking the questions. At one point, I remember the president showed basically a promotional video. I'm like, this is not journalism. This is not real communication. You can tell if communication is solid because it will transform across all the platforms. Like when they taught us how to write in journalism school, and I'm going to say this to you because I want all of you to think of yourselves as journalists in journalism school. They taught us to write for TV. They taught us to write for newspaper. They taught us to write for magazines. They taught us to write for radio. If you want to know that the communication is poor, it should be able to play on radio, TV, newspaper, and magazine. Meaning that what you're saying, the message has so much content to it that it spreads out, that people are able to access it with relative ease and with relative confidence. The issue about communication now is the world has gotten to a space whereby nothing's neutral anymore. When we were growing up, or when I was growing up, there were three basic outlets that you had to go with for news: ABC, NBC, CBS. ABC, NBC, CBS. The advent of 24-hour news actually came about with the O.J. Simpson trial, where it was just on, Court TV, CNN, and every once in a while you have the trial of the century. Okay, I'll give that to you. But what evolved out of that was a business model where people realized that if we essentialize something, we can drive profits, we can drive revenue. So it comes to specialization. Magazines like Current Edition, or Inside Edition, Current Events, all these type of things were interesting because they drove a wedge between real journalism. So these days, the model is with communication, people have driven a wedge between consistent information and giving of information without cost. See, the news used to be on, and people turn to the news. But when you're watching news, what you're watching is a generator for advertisement. When they used to have the soaps, the soap operas. Why did they call it the soaps? Because it sold soaps, Tide, Bleach, all that type of stuff. And those advertisements allowed the shows to be on, but the shows were there to draw people in to buy the product. These days with communication, a lot of communication, things that are said, things that are written, are really riches of driving revenue. So you'll have an offshoot now. If you break it down, Fox News is conservative. MSNBC is liberals. CNN is sort of like the neutral one. And headline news is sort of like the news feature thing, like a very news feature thing. So I'm talking to people about how you brand your communication. Who are you talking to? Why are you talking to people? We had a talk show a while back about creative writing. And what I wanted people to understand was the skill set of two things. When you write or when you communicate, and this is just talking to people, writing or whatever, even if you're texting people, there's two options you're going to have when you write something or when you communicate. The worst, number one is generating sound, and number two is generating noise. Generating sound, generating noise. The difference, sound is natural. You hear a bird tweeting, a bee buzzing, you hear a cow mooing. It gets in your ear, it vibrates, and there you have the sound. Okay, noise is different. Noise is uninvited. Noise is uninvited. When you hear noise, I think when you drop a plate falls to the ground in your kitchen, it makes that sound. Or you've been in a restaurant and somebody drops a whole thing of food. You're having a conversation, look over, it startles you. What's happened now is that we now have taken communication and what used to be good sound, to focus on sound, people now focus on noise. People focus on noise. Communication is built on noise. Let me give a shout out. My sister Layla, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Layla, I want you to listen to this. I'm talking about the difference between sound and noise in communication. We have now birthed a generation of people who use the words disruptive, who use the words predictive, who use the words pivot, things like that. And they use it because they're not good producers of sound. They're expert producers of noise. If you watch Fox News, when you watch Fox News, the things that agitate a lot of people about Fox News is that you know it's not true. And what you're doing is you're exercising or you're in an exercise where you're listening to a lot of noise. That's why you turn it off. The flip side could be MSNBC, and everything is about, the anti this, anti Republican, da 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 da, and you'll flip it off after a while because it's noise. CNN you can watch, but even CNN as of late has become very opinionated because that's what sells. CNN is not making enough noise, so we have Chris Cuomo, Don Lemon, people who do personality interviews. They're journalists, don't get me wrong, but they're being pushed to a situation where you need to make more noise so more people pay attention. Like I told you, noise before, it wasn't invited. Now, people look for the noise because they're trying to get your attention. So as opposed to the plate breaking accidentally, you now have people taking the plate and throwing it on the ground. Communication in the space of COVID has now become a tool of distraction. You're not going to get the metrics for the people who are really, really sick. That's unwanted noise in terms of an election year. Let's call it what it is. You're not going to get a cure. You're going to get a lot of distractions till we get a vaccination. You're not going to get a whole lot of stuff. And then let me give you an example. Because there is good investigative journalism out there, but you got to really go look for it. You got to really want to go out and, oh, wow, Doug, this is deep. This is deep. Doug Robinson. I wish I could explain this whole thing about 2 o'clock, man. My comedy special, I talked about Donald Trump in a piece called Donald Trump in E flat, which is talking about noise. In fact, I'm gonna actually talk about it. E flat is a beautiful tone, but in this space, it's not beautiful. When I was a first year school teacher, I had a rough class. I think I've talked about this. I had a very rough class. First year teacher, didn't go well. What I remember was there was this kid every day, basically at 2 o'clock on the dot, he would urinate on the floor. And it was bizarre because the first time it happened, I was like, oh, it could happen. Maybe he's nervous. The next day, 2 o'clock, urinates on the floor. I'm like, why does the kid keep peeing on the floor? And so it went through levels of acceptance. So the first time he did, it was like, hey, what's wrong? Let's get him some clothes. You see how we're reacting? Get him some clothes. See, look how we're communicating with him. Make sure you. Now the next week, we thought it was an accident the first week. The second week, we were like, yo, something's wrong with this kid. You need to, something happened at home. Do we need to call Child Protective Services? You urinate on the floor. This is crazy. We call him a parent. Da da da. The interesting thing was the third week, without fail, 2 o'clock, the kid got up and urinated on the floor. Everyone in the class looked at each other and they looked at each other and looked at hey, watching and said, it's 2 o'clock. Those are the phases of communication and distraction, sound to noise. Okay, so what am I saying here? I'm saying that you now have a situation and scenario, if you will. And by the way, Doug Robinson is a sound guy. His job is to capture audio on content because you really can't have good content if people can't hear it. We are moving to a content economy. When I say a content economy, it means that there was a space where we're all consumers because we don't know what's going on. Now, with the content economy, you're literally going to start looking at content that's coming your way. And you're going to make decisions on that content. And if we really, really master this whole idea, you're going to start developing content. If you want to know how it breaks down for things like social media, the big people on social media realize that I have an opportunity to develop content, and it doesn't have to be journalistic. Blogs, Instagram, Facebook is basically a large outgrowth of people who don't have to go through the same rigors I went through for journalism. You can say what you want, whether it's verified or not, whether it's true or not. You can conflate it. You can replicate it. Think about Facebook. Think about Facebook. I can put the words la-di-dee-dolly-dum on Facebook as many times as I want to because I have an account. So somebody goes, that's stupid, but just to repetitiveness. In business, we call that advertising. You would have to pay for that space. You would literally have to get paid. You have to get paid for that space. And we're in a scenario now whereby, because of COVID, like I said, things are flattened. So I'm encouraging everybody to frame your communication to be able to go out now and you develop content. When I talk about COVID, I'm not talking about COVID today or COVID yesterday. I'm talking about COVID for maybe the next 3 years, because people are going to figure out sooner or later that this economy is here to stay. COVID allowed a lot of things, and I'm not an investigative reporter, but I'm smart enough to realize that a lot of people make money off of COVID. You know, think of the amplification of things like PPE. We weren't talking about PPE for a while. PPE, face masks, face guards, testing. You can't get a thermometer these days because they're all out. And it's amplification of these things. Think about it. Face masks. We're talking about face masks. But there was a time when you got information or communication said you don't need face masks unless you're going to be in front of somebody. Now everybody's like, get the face mask. I'm pushing. I'm advocating for people to get ahead of these situations. Get ahead of these situations. Forecast. That's something we talked about before. Being predictive in nature in terms of your communication. So all of these social media type deals, I'll give you a prime example. When social media really got up and going, I felt like I didn't necessarily have to go to the comedy club to work out material. I would simply take a concept, make it really fine-tuned, not too broad, not too narrow, and I would put them on Facebook, and I would just see who would laugh. And I said, if I get, 15 good reactions on a joke, I'm like, I can write the rest of the joke. Like Facebook allowed me not to have to go to a comedy club and sit in a smoky room. Well, not non-smoke these days, but I didn't want to be around alcohol and all the drama and the environment of being in a bar. What am I saying? Communication. Speaking of journalists, my brother Jabril, are you down with PPE? You know me. I'm down with inform me, integrity, no Fox TV. Those are the things I'm down with. And I'm trying to nuance this as much as I can. I'm advocating for people to develop your communication models. I told you before how it used to be back in the day with journalism. I wrote a paper for a journalism teacher. His name was James Olzik. He was a 35-year newspaper guy in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And he asked me about the future of newspapers. And I looked in a newsroom. That's when they used to have the news feeds, UPI, AP. And it was basically a thing. It was about this big. And the stories would come over and you would rip the story. They give you a little baseline of the news and you would write new copy. So you're basically writing copy for news that had come through. And I sat there, I'm a creative, and I'm thinking, well, if I can just get the news straight for them, then why do I need you? And that becomes the blog economy, that people can get a little bit of information. They don't have to go through the LA Times or the New York Times or the Chicago Tribune or the Washington Post. They can take a little bit of information, write whatever they want to, and through these amplifiers of social media, just get it out. The most frustrating thing on social media is when someone says something about you that's not true, but it goes out to 1 million people at the point of a click. They don't have to apologize. Imagine that. They don't have to do a retraction. Imagine that. You just have all these people thinking a certain way about you. I remember one time I had a gig. I was doing a gig, and what happened was I was supposed to be at this other gig, but we canceled, and the guy didn't. He didn't pay me. He didn't sign a contract. So as far as I knew, I didn't have to do the gig. Well, the guy went up on, social media, and he basically told everybody I flaked on him. I was unprofessional, and it just wasn't the truth. You didn't sign a contract. You advertised without my permission. But my point is, at a point and click, I looked at his page. It went out to 50,000 people. I don't even know what 50,000 people went out to. Imagine you have to go around to 50,000 people and say 50,000 times that that's not the truth. And that tells you what the economy is. So when you're looking at press conferences, when you're looking at people do the news, look at CNN differently, look at Fox differently. Understand what that game is. It's like these people understand I have my own audience. Doesn't matter what you say, as long as I say it to them, that's all that matters. Whether it's the truth, whether it's a falsehood, whether it's a leading story or incomplete, it doesn't matter. My communication portal is all I'm thinking about. I'm not thinking about integrity in my communication. I'm thinking about the portal. And that portal has a lot of things in it. It has advertising, sponsorships, a lot of money, a lot of dough. Well, people, guess what? You can do it too, but you could do it the right way. Number one, that is developing communication communities, if you will. Checking and looking at information that's going out, double checking, sharing information. This is, I think COVID-19 is going to make this the share community for at least the next couple of years. Because I don't know. I don't want to sound like I'm a conspiracy theorist. I don't believe a lot of what I'm hearing. I don't believe a lot of what I'm hearing because I'm hearing it late, and a lot of it is to correct what you already told me. So that really makes me a little bit suspicious. You're a little suspect in that way. Think about that. Like for instance, the whole thing of Wuhan and stuff like that. If you really go back, and this is me looking at a lot of resources, the issue of COVID-19 in Wuhan is the fact that when the virus broke, it was a problem because China had invested all of this money to have a warning system, a bellwether, to let them know that when something broke out, they could jump on it right away. They invested $1 billion in terms of a warning system that lets them know when somebody calls, we're going to jump on it right away. The system didn't work. And the people who were on the ground dealing with this, they said, didn't want to let these people know that the system had failed. Now, there's some validity to this. You pay all this money, somebody's paid you all this money to develop this system. It doesn't work. And now it has huge ramifications. They got to shut down a whole city. Now, here's where it gets tricky. I believe there's a little bit of truth to that. Because when you start looking at the numbers for the amount of people who were infected, but also the amount of people who died in Wuhan, and then you flip it over and you look at the number of people who were infected in the United States and the people who died in the United States, it's different. I think Wuhan is less than 5,000 people who died. United States, 90,000 people. What's the difference? Communication. What's the difference? Integrity. Speaking to a space saying, hey, this is what it is, and not dealing with segmentation. So Fox News doesn't want to say it because they're protecting this entity, or this group over here don't want to say it because they're protecting this entity. And it all boils down to where we are now. We were a flattened society. So as I wrap up, I'm going to ask everybody, and I'm going to repeat a couple things. Number one, develop your communication. Be people that develop content, not just receive content. That's number one. Number two, look at communication that's coming to you and look at communications that's coming through you. Go from to you to through you. Being able to develop a filter that makes sense. And number three, developing communities around the idea of communication. You know what you don't see? You don't see as many groups for social media. Everybody has their group, their own hashtag, but if you put it together in a certain way, that could be a whole political action committee. Think about these things. The other piece, and I'm going to let you go because I know we're running out of time, but the fact of the matter is, you got to question everything. I'm asking everybody to go back to 1984 with me in journalism school and understand that you got to look at every medium that's out there. Radio, newspaper, TV, print, all that type of stuff. And understand, go back to 1988, folks, and just look at old newspapers, how news stories were written. And the way they were written was that people could check you on your stuff. Right now, people put anything out, nobody gets checked. Think about that. When I turned in the news story, I had to verify all my sources. People don't have to do that now. Thus, the communication is vague, but it's not responsible. So I'm asking people to take some of these things in mind. Now, as a comedian, particularly as a Muslim comedian, I I have it in myself, I have it on my spirit, I have it from my dean that I don't want to say anything that may purposely mislead people, which means that I don't want to lie about something. You can make metaphors or scenarios, but you can't directly lie to people. These days, you have people who directly lie to folks. They lie, they mislead you, they hide the truth. You know, if they were to put together a newspaper, you know what the name of the newspaper would be? 2 o'clock. It's Preacher Moss, ShOUT Show. See you tomorrow.